Hi, welcome to Waiting for the Last Trump. I'm Greg. Today we're going to get into part 3 of the Olivet Discourse. If you haven't seen parts 1 and 2 yet, I will put a link in the description that'll link to parts 1 and 2 if you want to check those out. It's not necessary that you watch 1 and 2 before 3, but if you do, the links will be there in the description for you. Part 3 of this series deals with what many people believe is the second coming of Christ, and other Christians believe that it's actually talking about the rapture of the church. I think something else is going on here that may give us a clue as to whether what's taking place is the second coming of Christ or is it the rapture of the church. So we'll get into that and take a look at that here in today's video. So let's get started. First, we're going to start off in Luke chapter 21. Verses 25 through 28. And it says, "And there will be signs in the sun, in the moon, and in the stars, and on the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them from fear and the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now, when these things begin to happen, look up and lift up your heads, because your redemption draws near." As mentioned in part 2, video 2 on this series, I see Luke 21 as being for the church. And this passage seems to be telling us what events will take place before the rapture of the church happens. So if you watch part 2, I kind of get into why I believe the Olivet Discourse in Luke is actually for the church, the believers that make up the church, and Matthew is for the Jews, and Mark is for, I think, the tribulation saints, so to speak, the people who get saved after the rapture. So again, Luke is, in my opinion, Luke is for the church. This passage mentions 3 main signs that we, the church, should be watching for. First, astronomical signs. Revelation 12, the Revelation 12 sign is an example of something that's already occurred. So that would be an astronomical sign that I think that's what is being mentioned here in Luke. Jesus mentions astronomical signs. There will be signs in the sun, the stars, the moon. And when we look at that Revelation 12 sign that took place back in, I believe the Revelation 12 sign did take place back in September of 2017. When you look at that, I think that's a sign for the church to, hey, be aware, we are in the last days. The second thing sign that's mentioned in this passage is it talks about the nations being perplexed at the roaring of the seas and the waves. I covered this in a previous video. I talked about this, but if you haven't seen that video, I'll go over briefly what I think that means. So I think there's coming a time where people, the nations of the world, are going to be perplexed at what's occurring in the seas. There's going to be a roaring of the seas and the waves. It's going to be turbulent. I don't know if that has to do with a pole shift or some kind of astronomical event that's causing the tides of the oceans to be affected somehow. I don't know. But I do know that Jesus says that the nations of the world are going to be perplexed at the roaring of the seas and the waves. In other words, they're not going to understand what's going on. They're going to be perplexed. So this is another sign that Jesus is talking about that's going to take place during the last days. Now, in my opinion, this has not happened yet. And I'm watching for it. If I start seeing something in the news about, the seas and the waves are roaring, very turbulent oceans and seas and things like that, to me, that's what I'm watching for. One of the signs that's spoken of, that Jesus speaks of here in the book of Luke. And lastly, the last sign that this passage mentions talks about people fainting from fear of what is coming upon the earth. It says the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Now, some translations, if you look at like the New King James Version, where it says heavens, there's a little footnote, and it actually says, some translations like the New King James, that footnote says the powers of heaven will be shaken, not heavens. So that can change some things as to how we understand things. If it's the powers of the heavens will be shaken, well, the heavens would be, I think that's referring to outer space. The galaxies, all of that. That's the powers of the heavens. That's the second heaven. If it actually means the powers of heaven will be shaken, then heaven, the third heaven, is where God lives. It's where God, his throne is. So is it heavens or is it heaven? Well, it depends on what translation you're looking at. So I'm not going to tell you which translation is right. Is the New King James right? Is the English Standard Version right? The New American Standard? That's kind of up to you to decide. But I will tell you that some translations have this as saying the powers of heaven will be shaken, and that does change things. So if it is the powers of heaven is being shaken, then that seems to indicate that something is taking place in heaven, and that's what we're going to look at here. Let's take a look at Revelation 6, verse 13. Revelation chapter 6, verse 13. And it says, "And the stars of heaven fell to the earth as a fig tree drops its late figs when it is shaken by a mighty wind." So note that in Revelation, stars are identified by John as being referring to angels. Okay, so when you read Revelation and you start going through, and it talks about things, it says stars. John actually defines stars at places as referring to angels. Okay, so could this mean that the fallen angels and Satan are being cast out of heaven? And is this what Jesus is referring to in Luke 21? We know that at some point, Revelation tells us that Michael, the archangel, is going to battle with Satan. And he's going to cast Satan and the third of the angels that followed Satan in the rebellion. They're being cast out of heaven. This is my opinion, but I believe that this is important. And I think this is something that's going to take place, I think, at the rapture. And I'll tell you why here. Verse 27 sounds very similar to what is taking place with the sixth seal in Revelation 6. So if you look at verse 27, it says, "Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory." So if you go back and you look at Revelation 6, and we'll do that here in just a minute, you'll see that these sound very similar. These events sound very similar. Verse 28 tells us that when we begin to see these things happen, look up, for our redemption draws near. Our redemption is Jesus Christ, and I believe this is referring to the rapture of the church. So again, it's my opinion, but I think that when we see the powers of heaven being shaken, is that where Satan and his followers, his angels that followed him, are being cast out and cast down to the earth? And we'll take a look at Revelation 6 here in just a minute. But again, the key here is to notice that in verse 28, it tells us that when we begin to see these things, when we begin to see the astronomical signs in the heavens, when we begin to see the roaring of the seas and the waves, and when we begin to see men's hearts failing them for what's coming upon the earth, I think that's a big clue that when we start to see these things, that's when we need to be looking up for the return of Jesus Christ to take his church home. Next, let's take a look at Mark chapter 13, verses 24 through 27. And it says, "But in those days after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars of heaven will fall, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send his angels and gather together his elect from the four winds, from the farthest part of earth to the farthest part of heaven." In verses 24 through 26, what is being described here sounds very similar to the sixth seal in Revelation chapter 6. So let's take a look at Revelation chapter 6, the sixth seal. Let's take a look at that passage and see how these compare. Revelation 6. It says, "I looked when he opened the sixth seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake. And the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood. And the stars of heaven fell to the earth, as a fig tree drops its late figs when it is shaken by a mighty wind. Then the sky receded as a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place. And the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave and every free man hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, 'Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand?'" And now, again, I believe the sixth seal here is referring to the rapture of the church, and I think that's when we're taken home. The other thing that I'll just point out here is a lot of people say, well, the seals are the wrath of God. If you believe that the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth seals, if those are the wrath of God, verse 17 kind of tells us that actually the people on the earth are saying, "For the great day of his wrath has come." And that's at the end of the sixth seal. So his wrath was not the first five seals or even the sixth seal. It's at the end of the sixth seal. They're saying the day of his wrath has come. Personally, I believe that the wrath of God is when the trumpets start. Okay? That's God's judgment being poured out on earth. But again, we don't always, not everybody agrees with that, and that's okay. But that's how I'm seeing that. So with regards to verse 27, in Mark chapter 13, I'm going to cover this in Matthew 24. All right, so we've covered again what Mark is talking about in that passage. It sounds very similar to what's taking place in Revelation 6. And again, verse 27, I'm going to cover here in just a minute. So let's take a look at Matthew chapter 24, verses 29 through 31. It says, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other." So verse 29 in Matthew here sounds pretty much mirrors verses 24 and 25 of Mark 13. If you compare the verse 29 of Matthew 24 with verses 24 and 25 of Mark 13, they're pretty much identical. Okay? So we have no issues with that. We're talking about the same thing. Verse 30 of Matthew 24 is pretty much the same as Mark 13, verse 26, with one major difference. Now pay attention to this. And that's the difference is this. In Matthew 24, it says, "And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn." This version in Matthew states all the tribes of the earth will mourn. So who are the tribes of the earth? Was that just talking about different races of people? Is that, what's that talking about? Well, this is, again, from my study, I'm coming up with this. The only reference to tribes that I can find in the Bible always seems to be referring to the nation of Israel, the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. So when I've looked at the word tribes, it tends to be referring back to the nation of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel. So if that's the case, if in this passage of Matthew 24, which I believe Matthew 24, this is for the Jews. It says the tribes of the earth will mourn. And I believe this is referring to the 12 tribes of Israel. All right? So why are the 12 tribes of Israel mourning when this event is taking place? When they see Jesus coming in great power and glory in the clouds, why are the 12 tribes mourning? Well, I think our answer can be found back in Zechariah chapter 12, verses 10 through 14. So let's take a look at Zechariah chapter 12, verses 10 through 14. It says, "And I will pour on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look on me whom they pierced. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn. In that day there shall be a great mourning in Jerusalem, like the mourning at Hadad Rimmon in the plain of Megiddo. And the land shall mourn, every family by itself, the family of the house of David by itself, and their wives by themselves, the family of the house of Nathan by itself, and their wives by themselves, the family of the house of Levi by itself, and the wives by themselves, the family of Shimei by itself, and their wives by themselves, all the families that remain, every family by itself, and their wives by themselves." So in Zechariah chapter 12, what we're getting here is this is an event where all of the tribes mourn. And the reason they're mourning is because they see Jesus Christ. And they see him coming in the clouds, and they mourn because they realize we crucified our Messiah. We killed our Messiah. And they were looking for their Messiah, and they ended up killing him. They pierced him. That's what this is talking about. They mourn. The funny thing is when you look at Mark, again, Mark is for, I believe, the Jews and Gentiles who get saved after the rapture. Okay? It doesn't mention them mourning. Matthew talks about it, but in Matthew 24, it says the tribes mourn. Okay? In Luke 21, there's no mention of this. There's no mention of this mourning. The mourning is taking place from the Jews' perspective. And I think that's what's taking place in Matthew 24. That's what's occurring. It's the fulfillment of what is prophesied back in Zechariah chapter 12. There's coming a day when the tribes of Israel will mourn because they pierced their Messiah. They killed their Messiah, and they'll realize that. Verse 31 states, "And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other." Now, many people think this verse in 31 is describing the rapture of the church. Others think that it's referring to the gathering of the tribulation saints right before the second coming of Christ. I believe what is taking place in this verse is neither of these things. Okay? I don't think what's taking place in verse 31 is the rapture of the church. And I don't believe it's the rapture or the gathering together of the tribulation saints right before the second coming of Christ. I think what's going on here is instead the gathering of the 144,000 from the 12 tribes. Okay? So if we look at this in Matthew from the standpoint, when they see Jesus coming in the clouds with great power and glory, it says they will mourn they'll mourn when they see him come. And those from the 12 tribes, I think there's going to be 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes that will immediately get saved at that point. They'll understand what's happened, and they'll mourn, and they'll immediately be born again. They'll be saved. They'll realize who Jesus is, that he's their Messiah, and they'll be saved. And what's taken place in verse 31 is not the rapture of the church or the rapture of tribulation saints before the second coming. It's the gathering together of the 144,000. Okay? And God's going to gather the 144,000 together for a reason, and we'll see what that reason is here in a minute. The reason I believe this is referring to the 144,000 is due to the footnote in the New King James for the word elect, which defines elect as chosen ones. I believe immediately after the rapture of the church of the sixth seal, the 144,000 will be gathered together supernaturally and sealed and protected. Okay, so they'll be sealed and protected at this point. Again, if you look at the footnotes in some of the versions where it says elect, it actually says it means chosen ones. Well, the chosen ones have always been the chosen people of God is the nation of Israel. Among all the peoples of the earth, the nation of Israel was special to God. He chose them. He chose to work through the nation of Israel to redeem the whole world. Okay, it's through Israel that Jesus Christ was born. He's a Jew. So he comes from one of the 12 tribes of Israel, and through him, the whole world is saved. Okay, so again, the chosen people, when I see the word chosen people, to me, that's referring back to Israel. And then once we start putting this together, I think it starts to fall in place. The nation of Israel is referred to throughout Scripture as God's chosen people among all people of the earth. Also, immediately after the sixth seal of Revelation, we see in Revelation chapter 7 the sealing of the 144,000 before the first trumpet judgment is blown. Okay, so if you go and look after the sixth seal in Revelation 6, starting in chapter 7, verse 1, we see there's 144,000, and it goes through and it names 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes. And there's a voice that says, seal these 144,000 before the angels that have the trumpet judgments blow their trumpets. They're instructed to seal the 144,000 to protect them from the trumpet judgments that are about to come upon the earth. Okay, so it's the 144,000 that are supernaturally protected and sealed from the events that are going to take place with the trumpet judgments. Everybody else on the earth is going to suffer from these trumpet judgments. The 144,000, though, will be protected from those judgments. They won't be affected by any of the trumpet judgments. Immediately after the description of the 144,000 in Revelation chapter 7 being sealed, we see a great multitude which no one could number in heaven from all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues. This, I believe, is the church in heaven after the rapture of the church after the sixth seal. So, again, if we look at the sixth seal, chapter 6 of Revelation, and then read Revelation 7, we see the 144,000 are sealed, and then there's this great multitude. So if we go back to Matthew and read that, we see the events that sound just like the events of Revelation chapter 6, the sixth seal. And then it says there's a gathering together of the elect. And I think the elect there are the Jews, or not just the Jews, but people from the 12 tribes of Israel, 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes that immediately get, I believe, saved when they see Jesus coming in the clouds. And they are the 144,000, and they're being gathered up because they're going to be sealed and protected. So they're a special group that's protected, and that's what I think is taking place. The wording, you hear the trumpet and stuff, and people assume, well, that must be the rapture of the church. I think the rapture of the church takes place, but then there's this 144,000 that are also protected. The closing passages of the Olivet Discourse. First of all, there's the fig tree generation passages in all three accounts, and they're identical. So if you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Olivet Discourse concerning the fig tree generation, you'll see that they're pretty much identical. I did a video on the fig tree generation, so I'm not going to get into that in this video. If you're interested, I'll put a link for the video of the fig tree generation in the description as well if you want to check that out. Or if you go to my page with all the videos, you can find it there as well. The Olivet Discourse concludes with an exhortation to watch and that no one knows the day or the hour. Okay, so in Luke in the book of Luke, Jesus is telling, I believe, the church to watch and to be ready, not to be caught up in the cares of this world, not to be caught up in the things of this world. And there's a lot of things going on in the world today that could distract us. I think we need to be careful that we're not getting too caught up in fighting the injustices in the world and getting caught up in that. I think Jesus gave us the command to preach the gospel to all the world. That's what we should be doing. If we want to fight Satan, if we want to fight the evil in the world, the best way to do that is to preach the gospel. So again, preach the gospel and be watching, okay? And that's what Jesus is saying in Luke. In Matthew and Mark, he talks about that nobody knows the day or the hour, okay? So the Olivet Discourse, again, it concludes with these to watch and that nobody knows the day or the hour. In closing, if you like what you've seen, subscribe, hit the like button. That helps a lot. Something else, for those of you who watch and follow the channel, I'm just curious where some of you guys are from. So if you want to leave a comment and say, hey, I'm from, Columbus, Ohio, or from Guelph, or from Miami, Florida, or wherever you're from, I'm just curious to see where some of you are from. So, and maybe you'll find that there's some other people who are watching that are maybe close by where you live, and maybe you can strike up a friendship or something. So I'm just curious to see where some of you guys are from. If you want to leave a comment, put that in. I'd be interested to see where you're from. The ABCs of salvation, if you're watching this and you're not sure if you're saved, it's very simple. A, admit that you're a sinner. We're all sinners. Everybody that's ever been born will sin in their life. So admit that you're a sinner. B, believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross to pay for your sins in full. His shed blood covered your sins in full. There's nothing more you need to do. And C, confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior. If you do that, and then you'll be saved. If you have questions or comments, again, you can leave comments in the comments section. If you want to leave me an email, my email is here at the bottom of the screen. You can send me an email, and I'll get back with you as soon as I can. Again, thanks to all of you who watch on a regular basis. Hopefully this has been something that'll enlighten you. Even if you don't agree with everything I'm saying, at least try to understand where I'm coming from. And maybe we can have a good discussion about why you think I'm wrong, or, maybe you think I'm right on this. Ultimately, it's about studying the scriptures for yourself, and I hope you'll keep doing that. Again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you back here soon. Bye.